I'm Josh Ryan, licensed professional counselor, and this is your Daily Rep, a short practice to build emotional control under pressure. Most people believe the way to win in a disagreement is to make their argument stronger. It may be a clearer explanation, a sharper point, or using a better defense. But oftentimes, arguments rarely change people's minds. Arguments tend to trigger defenses. When someone feels their position is being challenged, their brain shifts into protection mode. They stop listening for understanding and they start listening for weaknesses in the other person's perspective. They watch for ways to defend their position or counterattack the other person's. That's why arguments tend to escalate instead of resolve. Two people trying to prove their point, two nervous systems protecting identity, two voices physically getting louder. But there's a different way to move a conversation forward. Simply, it's by questions. Questions interrupt defensiveness because questions don't attack identity. Questions invite explanation. When you ask a question, the other person has to think instead of defend. And the thinking changes the direction of the conversation. Think about the difference between these two responses. Someone says something you disagree with. The reactive response might sound like, "That's not right." Immediately, the other person feels challenged. And now they feel the need to defend their position. The conversation has now become a debate. Now imagine a different response. What led you to that conclusion? Same disagreement, different response, but the question changes the dynamic. Instead of defending, the other person begins explaining. The conversation moves from confrontation to exploration. Questions slow conversations down. They create space for understanding. They allow both people to examine the issue more carefully. And often, when people explain their reasoning out loud, they begin to hear gaps in their own thinking. Not because you forced them to, but because the question encouraged reflection. This is why great negotiators rely heavily on questions. They don't dominate conversations, they guide them. They allow the other person to reveal their perspective, their motivations, their concerns. And once those concerns are visible, the conversation becomes much easier to navigate. Questions also lower emotional intensity. Arguments increase emotional pressure. Questions reduce it. Because questions communicate curiosity. And curiosity is rarely perceived as a threat. When people feel understood, they become more open. And openness creates opportunities for real dialogue. This is also why strong leaders ask more questions than they make statements. Leaders are not trying to win arguments. They're trying to understand situations. They're trying to gather information. They're trying to see perspectives that they may have missed. By using questions, they expand the conversations they're in, instead of allowing arguments to narrow it. But asking effective questions requires discipline. Reactive people ask questions that sound like accusations. Questions like, "Why would you do that?" Or "What were you thinking?" Those aren't real questions. Those are just disguised attacks. And they trigger defensiveness just as quickly as an argument would. Disciplined communicators ask questions that invite clarity. Questions like, "Help me understand what you're seeing." "What concerns you most about this?" "How do you think this situation developed?" Those questions communicate something more powerful. They communicate respect. And respect lowers defenses. Respect increases cooperation. And cooperation creates better outcomes than confrontation ever will. Questions are also powerful because they slow your own reaction. When you ask a question, you are deliberately choosing curiosity over confrontation. You are choosing exploration over escalation. That choice protects the conversation and it protects the relationship. Because the goal of the communication isn't simply to prove your point. The goal is to move the situation forward. And sometimes the fastest way forward is not arguing harder or louder. It's understanding deeper. Questions create that understanding. When used right, they reveal assumptions. They uncover misunderstandings. They expose hidden concerns. And once those things are visible, solutions often become easier. Arguments tend to hide problems. Questions uncover them. Let's make this a little more practical. Imagine someone criticizes a decision you made. The reactive response might be immediate defense, something like, "That's not what happened." But a disciplined communicator might say something like, "Can you walk me through what you're seeing?" Now the other person explains their perspective. You learn something. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe there's information you didn't have. Or maybe their concern reveals something worth addressing. Either way, the question created progress instead of escalation. Questions also increase your authority. People expect arguments during disagreements. They expect defense. They expect counterpoints. When you ask a thoughtful question instead, it changes the dynamic. The conversation will slow down. The intensity of everyone's emotions begin to drop. And people begin thinking more carefully about their responses. That shift increases your influence because influence comes from guiding conversations, not dominating them. Reactive communicators argue. Disciplined communicators explore. And exploration produces better outcomes. So today's rep. The next time you disagree with someone, resist the urge to argue. Instead, ask one genuine question, something simple, something like, "Help me understand how you're seeing this." Then listen carefully to the answer. Don't interrupt. Don't prepare your counter argument. Just listen. You might be surprised how often a conversation improves when curiosity replaces the tendency for confrontation. This is part of Pillar 3, choosing your response. And sometimes the strongest response isn't an argument, it's a question. Because questions invite understanding, and understanding moves conversations forward. If you're serious about building emotional discipline and communication strength, stay with us in this process. We're almost halfway through the 30-day discipline run. This is 12 reps completed, 18 more to go. If you'd like to get the book or the workbook and read more about it, you can go to pauseandrespond.com. But don't forget to follow the show so you don't miss the next rep. Tomorrow we'll talk about something that makes questions even more powerful. Why listening is the most underrated communications skill in conflict. Less reaction, more choice.